You might have heard of the term double materiality assessment, or DMA. It's a term that we use a lot in sustainability at the kind of higher ends of carbon accounting. So when we talk about some of the bigger standards that larger companies have to do, DMA is a central part of this double materiality assessment. This video looks at what it is. So it looks at, what is a double materiality assessment? How do you do it? What tools have you got available to make it easier for you? And there are some great AI tools, which I'll show you. And what they're looking for, what sort of things should you be heading for? If you are a smaller size company, so say, for example, you've got revenues of say less than 25, 30 million pounds, you probably won't need to do this. If you're in that category, probably not for you. If you are one of the larger companies that have to do one of the sort of like more advanced levels of carbon accounting and carbon accounting reporting and disclosures, then absolutely this is for you. And I think if you watch this video to the end, I think you get some pretty good tips about how I can save you some time when you look about doing your DMA. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what it is, who should really be doing it, a little bit more detail, what you should be heading for, what does good look like, what does normal look like, and stuff like that. I'll be talking about how you can create them in the first place, so show you some tools and tips for that, how to rate them and score them, and how to then sort of decide which ones to disclose in the reports that you have to do. Okay, I might be using a couple of acronyms in this video. Sorry about that. The whole industry is rife with acronyms at the moment. But if I say DMA, double materiality assessment, that's what I mean by that, DMA. Okay. Now, a couple of other acronyms for you. The people who are probably, the companies that are probably looking to do DMA, they have to do it, are the larger companies, okay? You might be doing something like this already under the non-financial reporting disclosure, which is a European standard, and some of the non-financial reporting associated with being a listed company. But if you are in certain standards, you have to do it. It's a central pillar of certain standards. The standards I'm really talking about here are, first is CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is a new European sustainability reporting legislation. Now that has DMA built in, so that is just really, really core of CSRD. It is littered throughout the standards. The second standard where you are required to do a double materiality assessment is TCFD. Now, as you know, in 2024, TCFD was, I think, depreciated, but it's no longer going to be a requirement in the UK legislation. They're swapping it over to a better standard, in my opinion, a much better standard called, done by ISSB, and it's the IFRS S2. So loads of acronyms. Don't worry about them unless you kind of, it's one of these things where if you know what they are, you're probably in them and they're very relevant for you. If you don't know what they are, maybe then you don't need to do a double materiality assessment. But those three standards again are European CSRD, UK TCFD, and UK ISSB. Okay, so those three, you're going to have to do double materiality assessment. In terms of the benefits of other people doing it, frankly, it's more of an advanced topic and you got to question whether it's worth it. Okay, some of the tools now with the AI stuff I'll be showing you a bit later on mean it's actually quite straightforward to do, but it is a fair amount of work and none of the other standards calls for it, not that I'm aware of anyway. If you know of anything, let me know, ping me a note and say, look, I'll tell you what, there, you missed that one out. I probably wouldn't do it voluntarily. So I'd do it if it was standards based and you're required to do it, otherwise I'd probably skip past it, okay? Now, what is it? The double materiality assessment is a way of assessing you and the environment in both directions, okay? So direction one is the effect you have, the impact that you have on the environment, okay? Broadly speaking, that's the I of impact, risk, and opportunities, IROs, okay? And as you'll see later in this video, the DMA, the double materiality assessment, is done by performing a lot of impact, risk, opportunity assessments. Lots of jargon, but I'll show you what I mean. I promise, it will make sense, okay? So the double materiality assessment looks at your effect on the environment, your impact on the environment. But here's the critical part. it also looks at the risks and opportunities that the changing environment has on your company. Classic examples, let's just imagine that you are, let's say, heaters, space heaters, and you're in the UK and business is going really well because it's been flipping cold over the past couple of decades, and all your sales numbers are going up. You might view that with milder climate in the UK, the market for heaters is going to get worse. That's an absolute example of warming climate, less demand for your product. That's a risk on your business. Okay. Another one could be, for example, that you own some real estate, including, for example, some really trendy waterside cafes, waterside restaurants, etc. You've got to look at it and say, with rising sea levels, and the figures I was looking at from a book I was reading over the past week or so, it says that by 2050, we can expect about a 4-meter level sea rise. And that can go up to 170 meters once all the ice is gone. That's a bit later on. That's probably, way far be gone and dead and gone by then. But you could see that, for example, with rising sea levels, let's say they go up by 4 meters, that your waterside locations are going to be flooded. So they're the risks to your business. You're required under these standards to assess those risks in certain ways. For example, how severe are they? How likely are they? What's the impact of those on your business? Okay, and you're supposed to look at it both in terms of business operations and finances. On the flip side, let's just imagine that you are manufacturing and supplying air conditioning systems, which is kind of weird because one of my clients does exactly that in the UK. You might say quite the reverse. You say, look, do you know what? This is a great opportunity for our business. Climate's getting warmer. Generally, we've been selling this many air conditioning systems, but as things heat up, we think our business will expand because we'll be selling more of them. Or you might be looking at sort of changing your products to take into effect or take into account the climate is warming up. So there's lots of things that you could do to assess these opportunities. And again, you are required to look at how severe are they, how likely are they, and what impact it will have on your business. When you do a double materiality assessment, you have a jolly good look about all of your business operations, and you have to assess whether they're under a risk, or there's a risk because of climate change, or whether there's an opportunity. Risks themselves are split into 2 groups: physical risks, transitional risks. The examples I gave you just now are excellent examples of just that. So if you look at, for example, the physical risk, the sea level is pretty much guaranteed to be rising. Let's just say it's 4 meters. That's a physical risk. You stand a chance of your business being underwater if you are in a low-lying sort of coastal zone. On the flip side, the transitional risk, how things are changing, how the market's changing, how market perception is changing, how people's attitudes towards your products is changing. And again, if you're selling, for example, air conditioning systems, that's a transitional risk. So you've got transitional risks, physical risks. They're called risks and opportunities. The impact you have on the environment, I think a lot of people are kind of understanding that at the moment as things like carbon footprint. With those, they're called impacts, and the whole thing together is called impacts, risks and opportunities, IROs. And the idea is that you analyze lots of IROs depending on certain scenarios, certain situations, and you quantify them, and that forms your double materiality assessment. And I'll show you one of those, but we've got one of the examples. When you do your double materiality assessment, you're required to look at the likelihood of events occurring. In my experience, there's certainly an element of guesswork in that. There are tables out there for floods. So if you go out there, you can look at any sort of area in the world and say, what's the likelihood of that flooding? But other things, for example, what's the increase in market size for air conditioning systems? I've got no idea. It's a very, very tough piece of data to get. And there's a lot of hand-waving vagaries going on when you do a double materiality assessment. That's okay, that's allowed. Okay, don't worry about that. There's a provision in most of the standards. It's certainly in TCFD and CSRD. I haven't seen it in ISSB, but in fairness, I've not looked for that bit of the standard yet. But that says, if, in your opinion, the data upon which you need to make a business decision is so inaccurate or vague that you can't make a decision upon which to change the direction of the business because there is too many vagaries involved. For example, what is the size of increase of the air conditioning market? We don't know. Then you're allowed to talk qualitatively. Okay, so you're allowed to say, we think the market for air conditioning systems will increase for this business. Okay, now if you have precise data, then you can do a quantitative assessment about how big the market you think is going to go. But it's up to you about how much detail you put into these things. It does vary hugely. And in my opinion, it varies based on two things. One thing which is probably obvious, one thing which is less obvious. The obvious thing, based on how much information the directors feel that they need in order to make a disclosure. So say, for example, that you are the director of a company that has air conditioning systems, for example. You might think, do you know what? I can make a statement that the market's going to get bigger, and I'm comfortable making that statement. Let's just imagine you're a same director of an air conditioning system owned by the public with a lot of public scrutiny, and you're turning over several billion. You might say, well, look, I think that's the case, but before I make a public statement, I'm going to get an opinion from someone who's an expert in the field to back up my suspicion. And so you wouldn't just be the directors making the sort of statement. They'll go out to some experts and get some verification of that as well. The second thing that's less obvious, and I've seen it a few times, is that when you do materiality assessments, they generally are signed off by auditors, okay? And whether it's one of the big four or someone else, those auditors are commercial beasties, and I am not going to suggest for one instant that what they do is that they try and fish for extra work, but there might be a bit of fishing for extra work. So the auditors might say, look, you've said the market for air conditioners is going up. We really think we should do some analysis for you to kind of quantify that. Knock yourself out. If you feel you need that analysis, get it. Just, caveat emptor, everybody's trying to make a buck sometimes in this game, and the accountants are there. They're going, well, there's a couple of 100 hours gone on doing that assessment for you. And I 100% have seen that. I've seen the same IROs with and without sort of justification. So it's up to you. You need to do enough work so that you are comfortable as a director making those statements. In terms of how many IROs you need, how many assessments, how many things you need to look at, it depends on a couple of things. So first is that, when we look at the likelihood of things like flooding, etc., it depends on which climate model you're looking at. So all double materiality assessments are supposed to be done on either one or two heating scenarios of the world. So let's say, for example, you say, look, assuming that the Earth is going to heat up to 1.5 degrees, what's the impact of flooding on my business? Blah, 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 blah. You can also say, what's the chance of flooding if the world heats up to 4 degrees, which is another very popular kind of scenario. Well, there's a lot more chance of flooding there. Now, you can choose to use 1.5 or any recognized sort of figure in between, or lower if you're very optimistic, but 1.5 or 4 are very common ones. In my experience, most people choose 1.5. The data's out there. There's a lot of data out there for 1.5 degrees. There's some at 2 degrees, but the 1.5 one is what I've seen everybody kind of go, no, look, we've got enough work on our hands. We'll just do that one. Thank you very much. When you do the assessment, they come up with a lot of possibles. That's called the long list, and I'll show you that a bit later on. So they come up with a long list of possible impacts, risks, and opportunities, and then they cut them down to a short list. And the short list is what goes into your report. Okay, that's what you publicly disclose. The other things you might choose to keep to yourself and just publish the short list. You might think, well, there's no harm and danger in actually publishing the whole lot. Knock yourself out, whatever you think. In terms of how many people are disclosing, TCFD tends to be around about half a dozen. CSRD tends to be about a dozen. Most I've ever seen someone do on their shortlist is 72, which I think is a bit excessive. Kind of like you're supposed to be focusing down on what the real risks are, not just listing everything that's possible. But, if you're doing TCFD, about half a dozen, CSRD, about a dozen. Now, let's have a look at some of the analysis. Let's get down and dirty, the second part of this video, how you actually do it. Okay, so let's take a look. So let me flip the screen across. Let me show you some things. So this is one of the standards in part of CSRD. It's done by EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, I think it is, EFRAG. And it's a pretty good standard. As I say, it's one of about 12 that make up CSRD. What they want you to do is they want you to assess all the risks and opportunities, okay, and the impacts, but the risks and opportunities, I'll explain that first. In terms of impact on the business, impact on your finances, okay, so two different lenses of looking at the same risk and opportunity. The impacts, by the way, that tends to be your carbon footprint, that tends to be your pollutants and your land use, water use and stuff like that. I'm going to concentrate largely on risks and opportunities because that's the other disclosures cover the impacts really pretty well, I think. But when we talk about the risks and opportunities, we talk about the scale of them, how severe they're going to be, the scope of them. Is it localized? So for example, you've got restaurants, is it just one restaurant on the water side that's got a problem, or is it all restaurants? Irredeemable character, i.e., if they flood, they're gone. Or can you move them? Can you sort of just shift them up the hill a bit, or buy a different plot, etc.? So what's the irredeemable character of the problem? And the last thing that's not shown on there but is in there as well, which is the time scale. Is this a problem in the short term, medium, or long term? And what you do is you give them a score. So you score the scale of the problem, you score the scope of the problem, irredeemable character of the problem, and then based on those scores, you get an overall score based on time scale, short, medium, long, impact, irredeemable character, and the scope, and that will give you a score. So you might imagine that you look at your business and you come up with a list of like 150 or 200 different things that could happen to the business. It's probably much, actually. In reality, it's probably around about 50 or 60 things that could happen. You give them a score here, and then what you do is you say, look, based on the score of scale, scope, irredeemable character, and timescale, I'm only going to consider the risks and opportunities above a certain threshold and disclose those in the report. That first list of 60 odd is called your long list, and the short list is the ones that are above whatever threshold you think is appropriate, and they go on the short list. Some things are defined in some standards, certainly CSRD. I'm not sure about ISSB. If the financial impact is classed as severe, you have to include it. Okay, so it's got to sort of, sort of like, if it's bad, it's bad. We ought to tell people. Let's have a look at some of the software aspects. This is the sort of monistic platform. Let me show you a couple of tools that can make this easier for you. So first off is if we go into the to-do list here, these are our workflows. I've loaded up ESRS S1, and so that's part of the CSRD. It's the first of the social standards in here. And these are all things you need to do. And in them, you've got this materiality tab. And the materiality tab is how we score things. So what's the scale of the problem? It's just what we were looking at just now. Moderate, significant, irredeemable character, etc., etc., etc. And then the financial impact, the same thing again. Okay? Significant, dotty, 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 dotty. So we give it these scores. Okay? That's what we're doing right now in terms of double materiality assessment. So right here, right now on the screen, we are now assessing, and in this case, an impact of its materiality. So that's what we're doing right now on the screen. We're doing the DMA. We're scoring it on scale, scope, irredeemable character, likelihood, and in financials, the scope, irredeemable character, and likelihood. Obviously, a couple of those are the same between each of those two categories. You then determine, in your opinion, whether that means it's material or not material. In that system, the impact we're looking at there is black and white, material, not materiality, not material. So that's basically, yes, this is, in my opinion, significant or not. And by that I mean it's worthwhile disclosing to, not worthwhile, we're obligated to disclose this to investors in our report, or we're not. So that's one of the things that we can look at, this materiality tab within the impacts. You need to do it for risks and opportunities as well. And let me show you a tool that we've put in the system that will make it a bit easier for you. The beta test group that have been running this. We're going to be making some, let's do climate change here, which is ESRS-E1. Again, it's just one of the standards of CSRD. We're going to look at risks, we're going to look at physical risks, and we're going to ask the Anistic AI system to generate us 5. You can go up to 10, but let's call it 5 risks. Okay, now it might take a bit of time if it does. And what it's doing now is it's generating 5 physical risks and putting them into the workflow that we looked at just now. Oh, not so bad, actually, pretty good. So if we go back into the workflow now, and don't forget this is for E1, so let's go back in here, change our system across to look at the E1 workflow. Then here is the environment section. The bit we want is right down the bottom here, where it's generated these 5 physical risks that in the AI's opinion, a business of this form, of this size, based in the following locations, that does the following things with the following types of sites. So, for example, rising sea levels. Here we go. That's one of the ones that we spoke about. And all of these have just been generated. And the idea is, by the way, you then go and generate some more transitional risks, maybe another 5 of those, some more physical opportunities, and some more more transitional opportunities. So risks, opportunities, physical, transitional. So let's look at the rising sea levels risk. As I say, it's generated the 5 down here. Let's have a look at this one here. This is what it's generated. Rising sea levels represent a significant threat to coastal infrastructure, ... But this is the bit I want to show you. You have to fill in the other bits, by the way. The report text is what you're doing about that risk. There is an AI generator in here that will fill that in for you. But the bit I want to sort of concentrate on is the materiality. The report text itself is done in another video. This is the materiality tab. Rather like the one for impacts, it's got scoring built into it here, okay, which makes your life a bit easier. So as you change these, significant, likelihood, certain, for example, scope, insignificant, irredeemable character, moderate, likelihood, significant, it's giving you a score. And the score, I'll show you how the score is set up in a second, but it's based on your assessment and weighting of these characters. Okay, as I say, if there is a significant irredeemable character to your financial impact, you have to include it anyway, you can't choose. But this is judged it as significant. When you come to look at these DMA assessments, they're all listed down here. You see this is one we were just doing, score of 62. And the idea is you'll end up with a long list of risks and opportunities. That's this list here. And this is designed to be used to put into your CSRD report. This list here is your long list, and it's got these scores, 62, 40, 65, 54, etc. The idea is then you then apply a threshold, and you say the threshold is going to cut this long list of physical risks, physical opportunities, transitional risks, transitional opportunities down into a much smaller list you then disclose. So if you go into this handy tool here, I really like this one. This double materiality assessment tool allows you to change the weightings that you think should apply to the way you've scored things, and how many impact, risk and opportunities will then result in being on the short list or the long list. The way we do it is by looking at the assessment. Okay, so let's do the assessment here from significant at the top to insignificant at the bottom. The significant, insignificant, moderate, etc., if you click on this button up here, is set up in this area here. So you can say what score levels you want, what ranges do you consider to be significant, insignificant. And this one, as I say, anything over 61 to 80 is significant. Anything over that is certain. And there would be a lot of reason behind saying that you're going to include in your report anything that's significant or certain, which down here would mean that you're going to include 3 risks and opportunities rather than all. It's about 9 here. Okay, it's a demo account. Normally you'd have quite a few more than that down there. So let's hide that, but you can change which bucket they go into here, which category. But here's great. And I love watching this. Look, so once you've got your long list, you can then say, well, actually, I view scope as being very important. Okay, and these things not so important, and that's of the financial. And I view, for example, the scale of the impact as very important, and everything else way less down there. So you can change the weightings down here, which will change how the risks and opportunities that you've come up with on the long list, and as I say, normally it's darn sight longer than that, it changes the weightings so you can see how many make it into the significant and certain character of the long list, therefore what should go on the short list. Okay, now up to you what you put in. The system comes with some pretty good defaults. You can use those straight out the box, or you can change them around, and for example, reducing the number of points we give to score has produced 1, 2, 3, 4 significant risk and opportunities down there. As I say, if we go into them, heat waves and temperature extremes, that's in there, and it's giving it a score of 65. Now, that's 65, as I say, is viewed on what we were looking at inside just now, which is the way we score them. The impact, materiality, and the financial impact vectors, the way that we score these things. If I go back to E1 here, look at them down here, let's see if we can sort of draw some conclusions from the stuff we've been looking at, right? So first off, double materiality, DMA, is applicable and central to the larger sustainability reporting standards, okay? It's not relevant to the smaller ones. Second, it's about you assessing according to a scenario. Most people use 1.5 degrees about the risks that your business faces and the opportunities it has. Okay, impacts tend to be taken care of with the other parts of the standard. Thirdly, broadly speaking, on a short list, you're after about 12. On the long list, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 50 to 100 on the long list, which you then drag down to 12 in CSRD, maybe half a dozen in TCFD. Everything that is a risk and opportunity is transitional or physical, and those you give scores according to their scope, severity, irredeemable character, i.e., are they really going to hurt the business, and timescale, short, medium, or long. You then use those and you fill in disclosures. Say, for example, there is a severe risk of our main site flooding, and then in the report text down there you'd say, this is what we're doing about it, okay, or this is why we don't think it's an issue, or do you know what, probably is an issue, but we're moving out of this in 3 years' time and we don't view it as significant risk during that period. So that kind of report text is where you put in your clever words and your business plans to protect against the risk, or make the best sort of opportunity, make the best of the opportunity that's presented itself to you. There you go, got my words in a mess there. That IRO analysis report text there, you generate those, you generate the report text, you get a long list, maybe 50 to 100, slim it down depending on how many you feel comfortable with. Don't forget, you're obligated to disclose to investors things that they're going to find material. There are cases of lawsuits being brought against companies where they don't do that, where in the eyes of the people bringing the lawsuit, they didn't do enough disclosures or they didn't do enough work in that area. Okay, that's your call. You're the directors. It's your judgment. Okay, and the way we do that is that clever kind of tool that I showed you in the system, that you can juggle the scorings and the weightings, and it will pretty much generate your shortlist for you. There you go. That was a bit of a whirlwind, wasn't it? That is, in a nutshell, double materiality. That, in a nutshell, is DMA, which you use for TCFD, ISSB, CSRD. It's a complete plethora of acronyms up there, but that was double materiality assessment. Now, look, I hope that was useful. If you need any help with double materiality assessment, give me a nudge. All my details are all over the web, in the comments section, etc., etc., etc. Get in contact, and if I can help you, I certainly will. In terms of other things, if there's anything else you need in the carbon accounting space, let us know. And Nistic have been doing this for 20 odd years. We deal with about 300 large clients, and we've got experience in this, and we're very happy to help if you think we can be of help. Okay, hope that was useful, and I'll see you next time.